everybody.
Hello.
Hi, good
Hello.
morning.
Good
Hey.
morning. Welcome to the Art Panel Games Festival. A few of us will just be on voice call during this panel, so hopefully that'll be okay. So first of all, why don't we start with introductions around the table? Let's start with Brenda.
Oh, hey, I'm Brenda. I currently work as a technical artist at Wave, where I help build virtual concerts. We've helped do concerts for people like John Legend, Lindsey Sterling, and Rez. And outside of work, I also do like installation art. But yeah, that's me.
Great. Jade?
Hi, good morning, guys. My name is Jade. I'm a UI artist at Infinity Ward. I'm currently working on Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Call of Duty Warzone. As a UI artist, I help, work on layout, screen graphics, HUD, but I specialize in motion graphics.
Thank you. And then Stone.
Hi, everybody. Sorry that the video is not coming through, but my name's Stone. I'm an art director. I usually work in science fiction and fantasy, but sometimes I go into cartoons. And most recently completed work on Terminator Dark Fate, the mobile game, in coordination with the film. And right now I'm freelancing with Black Tower remotely that's located in Japan, but I'm here in California and doing conceptual designs for an upcoming game.
Cool. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. So I do have a few questions I want to start with.
Sure.
I do know that all of you have had experiences in very different industries. Like I'm Brenda working in concerts right now in entertainment. Jade, you've done marketing, and Stone, you've done like working collectibles and animation. So what I wanted to ask first was, are there any skills or experiences from different industries that you've brought with you from industry to industry that have helped you? Even when you're doing something different from game dev, as an artist or as just a team member?
I don't know what order you want to go in, but yes.
Or just anybody.
Okay, I'll try this one and then I'll let someone take the next one. For me, I think the most valuable skill that's carried over is, I think, two skills: learning good design principles and the ability to observe and gather up my ideas quickly, and thinking about the way things are going to be best communicated non-verbally. And that seems to help me whether or not I'm doing graphic art or pictures or a scene. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. And then the other thing, since my discipline often focuses more on characters, or at least the way I apply my discipline, my knowledge of anatomy, lighting, and color, just the foundational basics of art. And those two areas tend to help me the most in carrying over from job to job, regardless of whether it's cartoons or collectibles or video games.
Great, thanks for your input. And feel free to pop in and out of conversations, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else have any insight or maybe some experiences?
Oh,
sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think like working in different industries kind of teaches you to like collaborate with different types of creative. And I think that has been like really valuable, just like learning how to work with like different types of people and like different types of projects. And like Stone was saying, like when you do art, a lot of this stuff carries over between different genres, because as an artist, like really what you're doing is kind of creating like a theme or a mood to like convey an idea. So it doesn't really matter like what industry you're working in. It's all really pretty similar.
Thank you very much. Now on that, actually, about different industries, we actually have an audience question that was so good that I included in here. But Razison wants to ask, is there a big difference in the work or process for art versus art for not games? Like, for example, what are some things about game art that makes it functional for maybe other devs on your team or for your game, for the game itself?
So I can go. I don't know if we wanted to change the order though.
No order. You can just say anything you like.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the biggest difference for me when I'm making like personal art or just like game art is for game art, I pay a lot of attention to like if I'm like 3D modeling to like topology and like the poly count and stuff because I want to make sure that it like works and functions well in like a game engine. Whereas like if I'm just making like personal art where I'm just gonna like render like one frame and stuff like that. Like I don't really care about that stuff. I just want to make it like as pretty as possible. Um, so yeah, I would say that's like the main difference for me at least.
Yeah, and I think to Brenda's point, when you're working on personal projects or just, passion projects, you kind of spend a lot of detail on making it look pretty and look nice. When you're working on a video game, everything has to serve a function and a purpose. So you're really working on, the user flow to give the best experience to the player. Whereas, sort of making it look pretty kind of comes secondary after the user experience of the player.
I would say the same thing for me holds up as well. I feel like on a lot of projects that I work on professionally, there just doesn't seem to be enough time to do it the way that I would want to do it. So I try to put an order of importance and figure out what will give the player or the customer the most value for the time they put in, and then scale out from there. So if I can, within let's say they give me a deadline for a very short amount of time, if I can get almost everything in by that deadline, I feel that I've done well. But if I don't at least make sure that my most important things are included, then I feel like I've failed. So I'm always trying to make sure that no matter how pretty I want to make the art, that I make it a fun experience for the user. But on my own projects, I think sometimes I can drift off into concepts and ideas that no one else can relate to, but they help me unload and unpack new ways of thinking or looking at something. And then when I go back into production, I can sometimes pull from that period of time that I was exploring or more freeform or open-ended, because I didn't give myself a firm deadline. I was just trying to grow as an artist.
I suppose we can all agree that generally when you're working in games, you have to work by a deadline. So I was wondering, for in like a game in like a game pipeline for game art pipeline, how collaborative is the process? What other people are you waiting on, and for example, what skills would you value as an artist and team member in other artists, and what values would you value in a team member who is not an artist, like engineer or production, or any writers you're working with?
I mean, I think I can speak for everyone in saying that, when you're working in the video game industry, it is absolutely 200% collaboration. And I think that's such a huge privilege to be able to collaborate with, masterminds of everyone's specific craft. On the UI team, as a motion graphics artist, a lot of the comps that I'll develop working with my director is essential to engineers because it allows them to see kind of what it is that we want to put in the game and what they need to do in terms of work on the pipeline to make it possible. For the UI designers, same thing. It's also very important for them to see if we have the scope to create something like that. But it's not just within the UI department. I mean, I've had the privilege to collaborate and work with animators, with concept artists, with our art director, with MP designers. It's really just a massive collaboration where everyone's working on that one baby. We're all mothers of this huge game, which is super exciting.
And I think it's important to point out to people too that in addition to what Jade said, sometimes the amount of time that the team has had to work with can really change that dynamic. When you're new at a new studio and no one knows each other, there's a tendency for people to just try to do their best component, and it takes time for them to get to learn each other's patterns and sense of humor and common interest. But as a team works longer together, I feel that momentum starts to build. And sometimes when I join a team as an art director, there will be a lot of people that'll be nervous. And then as they see me sharing and drawing with them and joking, they start to feel that I can relate to them and advocate for them, and they let their guard down. So I think experience with people and having common bonds. So one of the first things I do when I join a team is I just go for walks with people. I go grab lunch with people. I try to include them in as many things as I can to help facilitate that comfort. Everybody wants to share, but not everybody feels comfortable with it. So that's an angle that I see happen when you're responsible for a few other artists besides yourself. But yeah, everything Jade said is correct too.
Yeah, adding on to that, totally agree to everything both of you guys said. But something that I wanted to add is like when working, especially with like a cross-platform team, I think it's really valuable to have people who are really good communicators and that are open-minded. So actually at Wave, half of our team is in LA and like half of our team is in Austin. And so in order to like work with each other, we always have to make sure that, you know, we're like present on Slack and we like respond in like a timely manner, and that we, you know, figure out ways that we make sure that we like understand each other's needs and stuff. And that's how we like function well as a team. But yeah, that's like a huge thing for us.
And I do want to throw in one small but important point that I've noticed. Occasionally, I will work with someone who's extremely shy and introverted, and they'll feel a lot of pressure to socialize, but won't necessarily feel confident or comfortable. And I think some roles allow you to be comfortable being by yourself and for long periods of time. And so, like, I think when I do conceptual design, I can often be left alone because I'm in pre-production and I don't have the pressure of an entire team coming to me yet. So I have some distance. But when I'm in the middle of a production and the model that I'm modeling has to be handed off to an animator, and then a conceptual designer just gave me something, I'm sandwiched between everyone. So I have no choice but to keep marching at a pace. And so sometimes I think the pre-production period can drift a little bit out of its window of time. And I think some people gravitate towards expressing their role in just by themselves with their head down and working. But you know, as long as you are careful to observe the people on your team and be sensitive to their differences, even those people, I still try to find a way to include them and make them feel like they have a voice, even if they're not very vocal.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, Stone, I think it's you know, having joined the Infinity Ward team almost 2 years ago, it's incredible. Every single member of the studio just wants to, you know, include whoever comes on board on the team. You start just developing a secondary family at the studio that you're working, and everyone has each other's back. You know, if you wear your emotions on your sleeve like I do, you know, people are very sensitive in responding to that and seeing that, and they'll automatically come to you and kind of talk to you about what's going on. So it's, you know, whether you're an introvert or extrovert, the studio that you work at becomes your second family, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
I already like your studio just from what you said. That sounds awesome. You guys sound great. That sounds
Oh yeah,
cool.
no, they're incredible. I mean, really, second fam for sure.
Of all the things you could say, I think that's like one of the best endorsements you can give a studio is just to say that you love being with your team. So that's awesome.
For sure. I think also just like putting like employee bonding events in place like really help for that too, because we're really similar at Wave, where it sounds like Infinity Ward, and we're trying to do these things called like Thirsty Thursdays, where we like all go out together on Thursdays. But yeah, that's super important, like team bonding.
Yeah, that sounds super fun. That sounds great. I'm glad to hear that all your studios are very close in that way. Generally, it seems like it's difficult, especially right now. But I wanted to ask, let's pivot a little bit. But I'm sure, like many students, you have a lot of students in the audience right now. I'm sure a lot of them are wondering, like when they're first entering the industry, what do you think would make or break a portfolio? Like, what are some essentials you have to do? What are some like top no-nos in general?
Well, I can try throwing a few ideas in. Um, There are quite a few strategies that I've seen work well for different people that I've seen in the beginning of the career and how they've navigated it. One approach is to just find one thing that is relevant to some stage of production. And if I say a stage of production, I might be simplifying it to pre-production, production, and post-production. And so if you have a skill that you do really well as you're just starting off your career or even your education, let's say concept art, then afterwards start trying texture painting. And then if you can move into a post-production skill, then at least early in your career, you'll have the versatility to navigate different stages of production. And on teams that aren't as large or that don't have as much of a budget, especially when you're new and you may not be at a well-known studio that has more stability, it'll enable you to continue to grow and stay employed and be valuable instead of just being let go for that period. But the other thing is just having your foundation in whatever you do. I personally advocate and really push that people build a bigger mental vocabulary of the thing that they want to do. So the more exposure you give yourself to your discipline and to other people that are in your discipline and what they're doing, and just things from nature or things from life where it's relevant. In my case, it's often character and environment design. The faster I can perform. And so it's like investing in myself. So doing that early in your career, then trying to catch up later, I think helps a lot. And it applies to typography, to just about anything, just building that mental reference library by lots of practice and exposure and trying to listen to other people and learn.
On that mental reference library, I was curious. All of you worked in, I suppose, futuristic or sci-fi genres. So where do you find your reference? How do you find your inspiration? What's your personal process for that?
Well, on the Terminator Dark Fate game, we had to do hunter killer designs. And so for me, that was a bucket list project. I was really nervous. There were a bunch of designers from Blur that were extraordinary at doing industrial and mechanical design. I had never done any vehicles or machinery, and I was just choking and nervous. And then I'm an art director on one of their studios externally. And so I had all this pressure, not only to find some good reference, but to do it at a competitive level. And I fell back on what works for me, which is the biological world. And I just looked at all of the places where they needed to put a hunter killer, which is nothing more than just a robot that's going to kill people, for anybody who might not be familiar with the franchise. And I thought about what things in nature would lend itself well to that type of movement or attack. And I would pull from those animal types. And I would just make a list of, we had one that we had to make that had to run over trash, uneven terrain, and up the sides of buildings. And so I just looked at animals that could do that. And I thought spiders, goats, and any animal that has limbs or body parts. And so in studying nature and learning about different species, it gave me the idea of where to place the limbs and how to shape them. And then I just started to make them look more mechanical. But a lot of the best mechanical designs are derived from biological sources. So for me personally, I pull heavily from biology. But everybody has their own method. Some people just get online and just type in a keyword and just see what comes up. And that's actually valid too, to just see what else is out there on the internet.
I think for us at Wave, it's a little different because it's, well, not really. We make virtual concerts, so we're kind of taking inspiration from like existing games in terms of like interactions, but also music videos. So a lot of our like research comes from like based on like whatever artists that we're currently working with. We'll like just go through, watch all their live concerts, like watch all their music videos. And then a lot of times too, like I think a really good tool for finding inspiration just for like art styles in general is like Pinterest. I'll
Oh
also,
yeah,
yeah, it's great, right?
I use it all the time.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, I would just have like boards for whatever project I'm working on and just like fill it with a bunch of different like art inspiration. And yeah, that's kind of like our process for finding stuff.
I have boards for the most obscure thing, like
Yeah.
barrettes or like asymmetrical hairstyles. So you're right. Having good reference material, I heavily do that. So I have to confess, I have like hundreds of thousands of pins on my Pinterest. So
Yeah, something about Pinterest, I don't know why, but like their images are just so much better than Google images. It's just like high quality, like really dope art.
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I hate opening it because I don't want to stop pinning things, and
I
then
know,
I
I'm the
can't
same.
get my work done.
It's so distracting.
Thanks for saying that. I was like, I forgot about that.
Yeah, Pinterest is so huge. Jade, I was curious, also about UI design specifically, for your menus and holograms. Where do you find your inspiration? Where do you find your reference?
So, I mean, kind of touching on what both Brenda and Stone were saying, I think what was very interesting working on Call of Duty Modern Warfare, it was a very challenging experience for, the UI team because, you're going to emulate something that is super grounded, that you want to, convey a form of realism, something that actually is happening here now in the military, in our world. So there's only a limited amount of imagery that you can search on public searches about, drone HUD, military tablet. I mean, not many people actually know what that looks like, and there isn't that much reference in public searches. So it was very challenging. You have this mixture on what you're able to see on Pinterest, on Instagram, on all social media platforms about military inspiration, about sort of, going more into the sci-fi route as well, satellite, HUDs, anything that you could kind of pull to have a sense of how it could translate to military, grounded military sim HUD. And I think the biggest challenge was to take a step back. And we called the F word on our team, which was the fluff word. You did not want to include any fluff in your design. And that's very, very hard as a UI artist because you want to layer your design. You want to make it look interesting. You want to convey a sense of emotion. So the biggest advice I can give you when you want to do your research and you want to create something that is very authentic is you want to give purpose to every single element that you are building. You need to be able to give a reason when you're, creating a HUD or screen graphic. And you need to tell your director, I've placed all of these elements because look, this has a purpose. This is there because, you tell your story, whatever it is that you're designing. But when you're having meetings with your stakeholders and with your directors and they're asking, well, why is this there? You have a reason, you have a purpose, you tell a story and you're conveying an emotion to your audience. But to go back to the point of reference, for me as well, Instagram has been an incredible platform. When I didn't have as much experience in the game industry in terms of the work that I would put in my portfolio, I would just every single day create a render. And that's such a, it's such a trend now. You look at Beeple, you look at so many artists that they do that on a regular basis. And what that does is not only does it connect you with an incredible network of professionals. I've gotten to get to know people that work at Territory Studio, Double Negative, Cantina Creative. Those are just like my biggest inspiration in terms of UI art, screen graphics. And those people are so humble. Those are people that are extremely talented at their craft, that have worked on a huge portfolio of movies, of video games, and they're so humble and they're super quick to share advice with you. Techniques, how they find their inspiration. So if you don't have a lot of, of experience, or you're just not really sure what you want to do as a career, just start exploring your creativity and do renders every day. And if you don't have time on during the week, do it on the weekends, once a month. But start building the identity and connect with all these professionals on social platforms.
What Jade is saying, I think, is actually one of the most important things that has helped me and I've seen help others, which is even if you're not where you want to be, is just start doing the thing that you want to do and to produce. I was reading an article that talked about they were trying to identify the living relatives of different famous geniuses throughout history, and they were trying to see if there was anything genetically that made them unique. And after looking at all kinds of information on their family, like Leonardo da Vinci had some relatives who they thought maybe he can see in different spectrums of light. Maybe there's something unique to him. And the only common denominator with all the geniuses that they evaluated was that they were prolific. And so there's this thinking that in the volume of your attempts, you begin to discover the secrets and unlock the thinking that's more refined and nuanced that you wouldn't have gotten to had you just not participated. And so I think intelligent, focused attempts are good, but also sometimes younger artists can just be so nervous of being criticized or failing that they don't push themselves as much. When I draw, I will make a mistake and I just draw right over my mistake and I keep going. And then I tell myself, I can always just redraw that later. I don't have to have that picture perfectly done. And I need the practice, and it's okay to draw the same picture 2 or 3 or 4 times and each time improve on it. So participation, I think, is just as important as accurate decision making when you're trying to build your portfolio.
Yeah, 100%. I think also, like, I know people are always thinking about their portfolios and like, oh my God, how do I make it better? But I think a way to make your portfolio better is actually to start making art for yourself and just like do as much personal art as you can, just like Stone said. And like, you don't have to post it online, you know? Like when I was in high school, I was like really obsessed with the idea of like being able to draw hyper realistic humans. And I really sucked at it in the beginning, but I made myself like draw one portrait every day. And then after about like a year or two, I was able to like draw them like hyper realistically. But like I think it just takes like a lot of practice. And then there's like a little off topic, but like going back to our old question when you said like what makes or breaks a portfolio, I don't think this really like breaks a portfolio, but I think it's always super cool when I'm like doing portfolio reviews for like job interviews. If I see that someone has like really dope personal art, because then that shows that they have like a passion for art and that they are like creative, which I think is always something that's super cool for artists, and that they have like their own personal style.
And one thing that, and I won't say too much more, but one thing I often do when I have the chance to teach or work with someone who's trying to break into the industry or gain more momentum or experience is I will sometimes just ask them, what do they love? What matters to them? What do they think is cool? And it's amazing how many people are working on stuff that their heart's not into because they heard somebody say that that's a good way to get in. And meanwhile, they're pretty awesome at doing something else, but they doubt themselves. And when you're early in your career, anything that you do is going to take a lot of investment of time. And so I'll often ask somebody to create a target for themselves, like find 2 or 3 of your top favorite studios that you would love to work for and make art that you think they would love to see. And whenever you work on stuff that you care about and that comes from your heart, it tends to be easier to follow through those additional hours to work to the point where it's respectable. But if your heart's not in it and you're going through the motions, it often shows in your portfolio that you're just kind of struggling. And if every day you took the amount of time that you worked on your work and you added up at the end of the year, a person who's having fun and enjoying it and able to do it for fun, able to do it with friends, able to do it with workshops, is probably going to log in a lot more time and get a lot better than someone who's nervous and maybe fearful of criticism and is afraid to share or exchange ideas. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable in that area and not take yourself too seriously, but surround yourself with some people who you can practice with as you're trying to get better, and it'll really make the experience a lot easier than doing it solo.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's excellent advice. I feel like I've learned a lot just by speaking to you for these short minutes.
Woohoo!
So, yeah. So we're gonna go into our audience questions right now, audience Q&A. We're about over halfway through the art panel, so thank you very much. So I'm just gonna ring them off, but let's try to keep questions. We actually received a lot of questions from our audience, so let's see how we can do this. But first, we were just talking about trying to enjoy a job. So this is a question from Anna for everybody. So how do you balance like all the needs in the game industry, like making quality art, sticking to a deadline, focusing on the game, while also trying to finish, just trying to avoid perfectionism and managing your time?
Oh my God, it is like the hardest thing, especially like at our company, we always have like really quick deadlines and turnarounds. So it's always a struggle between like, how do we make this as pretty as possible, as performative as possible, and um, like hit our deadline. And so I think it all kind of comes down to like scope and how you scope the project. So if you know the deadline ahead of time, we try to like design something that would not take too long to make, but be really cool looking. So it's kind of like it's super cliche, but it goes back to like quality over quantity. So I think it's better to scope something smaller, but have it be like really tight and beautiful versus like trying to cram in like as much cool things as possible and then having it like half baked. Um, so I think just really thinking about time management and scoping is how we deal with that at Wave.
Yeah, I mean, working on a on a AAA game, the pressure sometimes is intense. Our deadlines are nonstop, and we have very high stakes to ensure we deliver. We have a very good production support system. I think as well, the most important thing is communication. If you, for some reason, whatever it is, don't think you can make a certain deadline, you need to communicate with your producer, you need to communicate with your team, your director. The great thing about having, a large UI team at Infinity Ward is that everyone supports one another. Everyone has sort of their own workload and their own deadlines and priorities they need to focus on, but we're here to support one another. So, another artist might look at something that I can't complete by Friday and be like, all right, let's tag team this, let's do this together. Or if there's really no way you can deliver it in time, you have to talk to your producer, you have to talk to your director. But don't be afraid to communicate, because what happens is if you do not speak out, if you don't say anything, then, there's a problem because something might not be done in time or it has not been discussed. So always speak up for sure.
Thank you very much. So this is a question from Jade for Brenda. So what are some skills that people should build when they want to become a technical artist?
Well, technical artist actually means like different things at different companies. Like some people are looking for people who are more like software engineers who build tools for artists. And other people are looking for like artists who have technical skills like coding and stuff like that. So I think first you should like figure out like what type of technical art you want to do. For me, I'm more of like the artist that can like also code and like make cool things. And I guess the best piece of advice would be, just try to like, this is gonna sound stupid, but like going back to like what Stone said earlier, but like I think the best way of like learning a skill is by just doing it. Um, and so if you want to be like a technical artist, like maybe you can think about like, okay, as I'm working on this art thing, like what is some kind of thing that I do over and over again that can be, made easier like through a script. And then you could like write a script for that. For example, like I don't know, like if you're like modeling in Maya and you have to like duplicate a cube like a million times, like you just like automate that. Or just like think about ways to like make the art process like more efficient and then trying to like build a tool for that. Um, Other than that, I mean, just like I did a lot of my learning from like watching online tutorials. I mean, I started off as just like a 2D artist, and then I transitioned into technical art because I'd always been really curious about VR and interactivity at school, but I had like no idea how to code or make any of that happen. So I remember like sophomore year of college, I just took like a beginner's like coding class for fun and like ended up like really loving it. And so from there to like actually become a technical artist and like learn all of this stuff, I was like, I had this idea for like a underwater like VR game that I wanted to make sophomore year. And so I just kind of like hit up all my friends that, you know, could code. And I was like, hey, like, I really want to learn how to make a VR game. Like, let's make something together. And so I just watched a ton of tutorials online. And then I learned how to like code and like make 3D art and stuff by like working on a project. So I guess best piece of advice is like, just have an idea for a project or something that you're curious about, and then just try to build that. And like, it's going to be horrible in the beginning. You're going to be like, oh my God, my code isn't compiling. I want to die. But if you keep like working at it and you keep pushing at it, you'll get there eventually. You'll get over the learning curve. And also another piece of advice, like if you have homies that are also interested in like similar things, you guys can like support each other and like teach each other.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. So this is a question for Stone, but it's also a question for anybody really, from Anna. So when looking at portfolios, how do you feel about people specializing in a certain subject or style versus being very like balanced and generalized?
You know, I think it's fine either way, because I've been at so many studios where one studio will have you convinced that the way to do it is you need to be the best specialist there can be, and it's really important that you do a particular role and really well. And then another studio will want you to be a generalist because they might be either a smaller studio, or they may be short staffed, or they may not have as many skills invested into that pocket. So they go back and forth. I feel my personal approach is try to master something and then move into something that you're uncomfortable in, but that can be helpful, and start to learn that while concurrently having established your value in another area. So when I first started my career, I wanted to be a character artist. And I brought in, I went to a startup video game company. I brought in a huge stack of character drawings, all kinds of stuff. I was convinced that I was the best guy there and that I could do it. Well, they put me to work painting rocks and trees on sprite-based textures, and I was miserable and I was frustrated every day. I used to complain to myself, but I did learn the discipline of doing tiles and tile sets and hand-painted textures, and I just did that day and night for a long time. So on the side, I took an art test for Blizzard. We're doing a StarCraft Marine. So in my personal time, I continued to pursue something that I wanted to do and develop skill. During my daytime, I learned to be better at a skill that maybe from their assessment, I was the best at that from the things I offered. And slowly, I was able to be the best at doing one thing and then move into something that I was okay at, that I could add value. And over the years, I've been able to help out and do different disciplines that expanded my skill set, that eventually led to me being able to be an art director. And so while I may not be the best at doing concept art and UI and any number of other art disciplines, I can do a lot of these at 80 to 90% of what other people on the team can do, but I can do about 15 different things. And so I can relate and understand people. If a person wants to, some people just love painting. They don't want to sculpt. They don't want to work with letters and layout. They just want to do one thing. And for them, that may be just the best route to go, is just put all their effort into that. But for others who want to do a few other things, some of these skills work together. So if you're going to spread yourself out, I would at least recommend work with skills that are complementary to each other, like concept, model, texture kind of goes together. But I don't know. I mean, I think both are valid approaches. The specialist works well at the big studio, and the generalist often works well at a smaller studio or studios that are run by more old school people, is what I've seen.
Thank you very much. So
Sure.
this is a question from Pat for Jade. Or let's see. Yeah. Well, actually, let's go into something else. So this is a question from our Twitch chat. So when you're working on a beloved franchise, how do you find a brand consistent with designing a way that you also find pleasing?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. So how do you keep the balance? Is that or is that the answer?
That's a really good question. I know for us, especially on a beloved franchise like Call of Duty, so we start the project with a style guide in place. And that really sets the foundation for how we're going to, create our assets and our overall art direction within our UI in the game. And that is kind of like our Bible, where we always go back to the style guide in terms of color, typography. You have to it's a tricky balance, because when you're working on layouts and menus, for example, the style guide is so important. You need to make sure, you follow it to the T. Everything has to be very consistent across all screens. But when you're working on something a little bit more creative, like HUDs, for kill streaks, drones, when you're working on celebratory moments, in our store or in a battle pass, for example, you have a lot more creative freedom. And so you take your style guide that you're given as a foundation, and you build on top of that, making sure you don't stray too far from the colors or the typography, and everything kind of looks like it's united. But there are definitely areas within the game that you can add your own, its own identity. An example of that, for example, in Call of Duty, in Modern Warfare, our battle pass really has its own identity, and that was so much fun to work on, because you're constantly working on delivering screens that need to have consistency across everything. And so when you're offered, to work on part of the game that you can be a bit more creative, it becomes very exciting. And that also kind of sets a new form in the style guide to work, on future aspects of the game as well. So it's this constant blending between following this very strict foundation, as well as kind of blending and blurring the edges and exploring your creativity as well.
Thank you very much. So on that, there's a question from a fellow person who's interested in UI from Pat for Jade again. So do you have any advice for aspiring UI artists? Any challenges people might expect? Oh, sorry, do I need to repeat that? This is a question for Jade. Do you have any advice for aspiring UI artists? Any challenges they might expect?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I graduated from the Vancouver Film School, and I had a diploma in digital design. So digital design, explored a very big theme. You could master in branding, which you're doing more advertising. You could master in motion graphics, UI, which of course goes to UX, UI art, UI design, pretty much anything in the spectrum. And I had collected all these skills after getting my diploma. And basically, I had to kind of decide, okay, what is it that I really want to do? What is my passion? What is something that I would like to master in? And I started writing down all of the skills that I had, and all of the skills that would pertain to helping my career as a UI artist. And again, from what Brenda had said, less is more, quality, always quality over quantity. So you narrow it down to about 2 to 3 skill set that could help you in becoming a UI art. And one thing that also really helped me was to look at, aspiring studios that I would like to work with. What are my inspirations? So at the time, what made me want to become a UI artist, a couple of years ago, was actually the work that Ash Thorpe had created on Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. His designs really resonated with me. He was able to convey this, emotional story through his designs, and it was unlike anything I've seen before. And so I really went down that same pathway in terms of aesthetics. And started looking at the works of Territory Studio, who, they do incredible work on video games, on TV, on films. I started looking at Cantina Creative. I started looking at Double Negative, all of which, they kind of have the same sophisticated art form in what they create. And It's about teaching yourself you're a sponge. So knowledge is power. Absorb as much of it as possible. Go online, like Brenda says, follow tutorials, learn foundations that are going to help you decide what it is you want to become and what style is going to define you. But it doesn't happen overnight. That's going to be constant work, constant practicing. You're going to create designs which you look back on 2 years from now and you're like, oh my God, what was I thinking? What was that? But that was super important in developing your own personal identity, who you are, and ultimately guiding you towards, wanting to become a UI artist or UI designers, whatever it is you want to do. So it's this very big journey of self-discovery, and it keeps going on. It never stops. Even to this day now, I'm taking all of the skills that I'm learning from working at Infinity Ward and applying it in my passion projects and my personal projects. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're quickly running out of time. So right now I'd like to expand the question to our other panelists. So there's a lot of students who have not entered the industry. They want to get work. So what advice would you have for them? Or maybe more specifically, what do you wish you could have known earlier when you first entered your field?
That's a pretty good question. I'll jump in and start it and let anybody else finish it. But for me, I think I was idealistic and had a lot of faith in people. And as I was at a lot of startup studios, I began to realize that a lot of people that I was working with they were still trying to figure things out. And what they would tell me was what I thought at one point was the way it's done. And then another studio had a whole different method of doing something and it worked. And so I think my first advice would be to be aware that there's more than one way to figure out your evolution, and surrounding yourself with good people and building stronger social bonds that can reinforce quality feedback and decision making in your life will really help when something goes wrong in production, or when somebody they do a layoff, or there are these moments that sort of can really, I hope they don't happen to people, but when they do, it's really jarring and uncomfortable, and you feel disillusioned, or you work really hard at a studio and then you don't get any royalties or benefits, and then the person shuts the studio down. You're like, what happened? And second guessing yourself. So I think for me, more than my art, more than anything else, is learning to build good relationships with people that can help me when these unexpected things happen. Because as far as the things that you should do, there's so many good resources online and tutorials and things. I think it's the things that caught me off guard that were the important things that I could have addressed more earlier in my career. So building good friends early on.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree with that. And then also, just to add on to like the job search part of the question, I think a lot of people, when job searching, just go on job boards and stuff. And like that's a great way to find your work. But I think as a student, what was really helpful for me was just going to like industry events, like networking events and like GDC and stuff, and just like making friends there. I actually ended up working at Wave because I met my boss at his motion graphics party, and it was super random. Like I was just hanging out there and like we started talking, and then he invited me to like the office, and then like we just kept talking, and then by the end of like senior year I had a position there. So like definitely look at or think about like alternative ways that aren't your typical like applying to a job board, because actually most of all the jobs that I got in my life, like most of them was through people that I met at like conventions or just like word of mouth. Like anytime I would like apply online like through a job board, it's like very rare to like hear back. And yeah, like Stone said, like just surround yourself with like cool people. I mean, I would say like a lot of the people in the industry are cool, but there's also like there's also people like that don't have your best interests in mind. So if you have like a group of people that you can like depend on and like grow with as artists, I think that's always like really helpful, and they do definitely get you through like the hard times.
But I think what you said is really important, and is that participating and getting to know people can really help connecting with studios. It seems like there's a point where you're first learning where you're trying to get your skills up to par, but then it starts to become apparent that a lot of other people are just as skilled as you might be. But what you may have as an advantage over someone else is that you know a few people at a studio who may simply just share with you when a position's opening. And so having that network of people, not using them and not being cunning or manipulating, but just literally just being part of the communication that goes on informally between studios really does help a lot. And so for someone who is starting in school and they're like, well, how do I do that? How do I get connected to those people? I just make it my policy to wherever I'm participating in gaming events or meetups, just to make honest relationships with people. And it seems to fall into place from there. Your reputation will start to follow you after a while, and some people will remember, oh, there's that one really cool person. They really liked a lot of stuff I liked, and we should give them a call because I think they did a particular art discipline we need. And you'll be amazed at how many people will reach out to you and over just having met you like at GDC or something. So I think what you're saying is totally valuable. Like,
Yeah. And I wanna go. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you.
Oh,
again.
no, go for it.
I want to like really emphasize that when you go to these networking events, you're not just trying to like network and connect to people. Like you're there to like make friends, because people can tell when you're like not genuine. And it's always like the biggest turnoff to me when someone like, when I can feel that they're just talking to me because they want something. I'm just like, I don't want to help you. You're just trying to use me. But if like someone just wants to be friends, like, you know, like obviously like you support your friends, right? So yeah, no one likes a snake.
And also to that point, please, please, please don't be afraid or shy. Talk to as many people as you can. If you have your business cards on you, give them out. That's actually how I got this job at Infinity Ward. I was at SIGGRAPH in Vancouver, and I met this wonderful woman from Activision, and there was something in the back of my mind that's saying, just, you have a great connection with her, just give her your business card. And I was about to not do it because I felt awkward and I was shy and, it was weird. I did it, and it was because of that I ended up, getting the job. So don't be shy, don't be afraid, go for it, follow your instinct, follow your intuition, and just be you.
Great. I think that's an excellent note to end off of. Well, okay, we're just about at the end of our panel. Thank you very much to our guests. Yay!
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry we couldn't get through all questions, but I feel like this is a very lightning panel. So we're gonna go off. We're gonna get off live for a minute and have our last goodbyes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Oh, also,
Oh yeah.
no, I just wanted to say, like, if anyone had any like further questions, like you can just hit me up on like Twitter or whatever. Like I'm always down to like help people. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much.
This is really fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
We can disconnect.